Welcome to This Week in Heresy, episode 22, Both and Spirituality, with our guest via Skype, Lizann Bassham. Hi, Lizann. Welcome to This Week in Heresy.
Thank you, Gina. Every week is a week in heresy in my life.
Amen to that. So, can you tell our listeners, actually, not viewers, a little bit about yourself and where you are in your spiritual path today?
Sure. I am both a United Church of Christ ordained minister and have been ordained since 1988 and served local churches in that denomination and done ministry in that denomination. And I am also a very active witch in the reclaiming tradition, and have been a witch all my life, but a reclaiming witch since the mid-1980s when I discovered it and went, oh, that's the kind of witch I am.
How did you decide that both Christianity and witchcraft was right for you?
Well, I'm really lucky in that it never crossed my mind that I had to choose, and that it was perfectly fine to do both.
Right.
Both from my witch tradition, but also from my Christian tradition, because the United Church of Christ is a pretty progressive, liberal tradition. Although for a number of years, I wasn't really active in the reclaiming community. I went sort of solitary for a while as I was serving a local church. But now I'm very out in both communities, and everything is good. My early experience of the divine came when I was a child growing up in a mountain community in Northern California in the Trinity Alps. Wow. A little town called French Gulch, which you would only go to French Gulch if you were on your way to Jackass Springs.
Awesome.
Yeah. My grandfather was the last stagecoach driver between Trinity Center and Redding.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's an amazing part of the world. And as a little girl, and on the other side, my grandparents owned the local bar and restaurant. And so as a little girl, it was really about running pretty wild in the mountains. Both my grandmothers definitely had witch leanings. And so what other children often people begin to say to them, oh, that's just your imagination. I really never got that. Oh, and wow. So when the trees talked to me and the water talked to me and the moon talked to me, nobody informed me that I was making it up. Right. So that was my first experience of the divine, of nature spirits of the world that is not quite as concrete as our cognition would make it be. Right. And then when I was 9, my father and we weren't really church folk. We weren't really religious folk. There wasn't actually a church in town. And my grandmother had dabbled briefly. My maternal grandmother had dabbled briefly in Catholicism and really enjoyed the mysticism of it. My grandfather was a Mason, which has
excellent.
Yes. Yep. On the other side, my father's father, his religion was good storytelling. My father considered himself an atheist. But when I was 9, he married a woman who had 6 kids. Oh, wow. And she was a Pentecostal Assemblies of God person. Oh, and right. That was my introduction to Christianity. And I loved it. I loved the music. I loved the speaking in tongues. I loved the energy of it because at my core, I'm really an ecstatic. And I thought that part of it was wonderful. But between 9 and 12, it became very clear to me that although I loved the energy and the way the Holy Spirit moved through that community,
Right.
Some of the ways they drew the world in terms of who was in and who was out and who was going to, and even the fact that there was a hell, was not in keeping with my personal experience that had been so deep and grounding as I grew up as a child.
Right.
And so by the time I was about 12, and at one point I had gone to Pentecostal Bible camp, and they told me that I asked too many questions and I argued with the answers. And it was probably too disruptive to be there.
Oh, no.
So at that point, my mother and I had actually moved to another town and began kind of church shopping, and we found the United Church of Christ, and it was wonderful. It was the 70s, and the minister was really into a lot of New Age stuff,
right.
and meditation, and so it felt very much like home. And not only was it okay for me to ask the questions, but it was also okay for me to argue with the answers.
Excellent.
That was actually encouraged. It was like many mainline Protestant churches at the time. There weren't a whole lot of youth. And so I got to preach sermons at 16, and I got to really lead meditation groups and be very active and involved in the life of the church as one of I think there were 3 of us, 3 youth in the church. Wow. So it was wonderful. And that was where I felt called to ministry. It was a summer afternoon, it was late afternoon, evening. We were getting ready for a Wednesday meditation group. I went upstairs in the church to the youth room. They had a room for the 3 of us, where there was a stained glass window, and I was just sitting in the warmth coming in from the stained glass window, and very much had the experience of the divine saying, "I want you to be a minister."
Wow.
And the first words out of my mouth were, "That's fine, but don't send me anywhere hot." And the divine laughed and said, "Well, we'll see about that." So at 15, I decided to become a Christian minister, because that just, because of the call and because of that experience. And of course, at 15, you have ministry is an amazing and interesting thing. There are so many aspects of it. And, at 15, I just knew that I had this incredible experience of the divine, of the holy. At the same time, my mother and I were also really fascinated with and intrigued by the Findhorn community in Scotland, where there's a man named David. This is very New Agey stuff, but they had created this amazing community with incredible community garden in a place in Scotland where nothing grew.
Interesting.
And the way they did that was by communicating with the earth. And communicating with the plants and communicating with and so, again, even though I was at that point then very steeped in sort of Christian church, I also was continued to be very connected to the magical world. Right. Not that the Christian church doesn't have its own magic, but
absolutely.
Yeah. So then I went off to college, got involved in the campus ministry at San Francisco State. It was that time when there was that incredible confluence of things. I mean, Reclaiming actually was coming into existence at that point. I was in San Francisco as a student. The Reclaiming Witch tradition was coming into being as those founding folks sort of drew on Some of the Wicca influences drew on the goddess scholarship and the goddess work that was happening at that point and just really exploding academically. Drew on feminist and anarchist thought, drew on Jungian psychology and archetypes. So that was happening in San Francisco while I was a student at San Francisco State. And the Christian campus minister at the time was very into feminist spirituality. And so we did, I remember going to a women's retreat and Vicki Noble had just created the Mother Peace tarot deck.
Oh, wow.
And was at the retreat.
Wow.
So those kinds of things happening. This is incredible, even though that was the Christian campus ministry.
Right.
All of that goddess work was just exploding at that point. And so then by the time I got to seminary in the mid 1980s, it just was continuing. And one of the most profound classes that I took in seminary, the Unitarian seminary actually brought Starhawk in to teach a class on worship and ritual. This is the fall of 1985, and it physically was located at my seminary, Pacific School of Religion. And so I took a semester-long class on worship and ritual from Starhawk, and that's
amazing.
Oh, yes. This, because I've always known I was a witch. That's the kind of witch I am. And, I remember a number of us from the class and other friends kind of going over. It was so it was 85. So it was like the 6th spiral dance. It held at the Women's Building in San Francisco. I will never forget it because it was still in that time when the witch and the pagan world were feeling that it was very important to continue to talk about how horrible the Christians were. And so here we were, a bunch of Christian seminarians, and we all just, we had two responses. It was either don't tell anybody or tell everybody and just let them kill us.
It's kind of like, okay, sorry.
Yeah. That was, it was Z Budapest actually, who was kind of leading some of that.
Yeah.
So, it was an interesting time.
So you got a lot more of that, like kind of consorting with the enemy kind of feel from people about
that point?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Excuse me.
I will say that when I started coming out as a witch in my Christian denomination, particularly my Christian denomination, hardly an eye batted. People were like, oh, yeah, like not a surprise, duh. I was always very careful coming out as a Christian in the pagan and witch community. And, just because people had been really both personally wounded by Christianity and, culturally wounded by Christianity. And so, I was much more timid to come out as a Christian until I realized that actually was helpful.
Yeah.
So, at this point I'm 55. I'm very active. I am one of the campus pastors at Pacific School of Religion.
That's how we met.
And that's right. And they specifically hired me. I mean, I got the phone call and the words were, "Hi, we have had this influx of witch and pagan students, and we need somebody who is both a Christian minister and a witch." And that's why I got the call and I got the job.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've been finding, like, I don't think it probably has the same amount of arg-eek as it probably did back when you were first coming out about being Christian and a witch. But, I still, have heard some flack. I mean, I haven't got like excess flack personally, because most of my friends are like, yeah, whatever. And, but like you said, like, I'd say probably 99% of the Christian side of it is kind of like, yeah, whatever. And there's a few people, even at Refuge, which is my church, there's a couple of people that, I ran into a little walls with about it. But usually it when we talk more and people get to know me better, then that usually goes away and they're like, oh, okay. And, yeah. But it seems like in the pagan community, because of the church burn that's there, it's a little harder for that kind of interaction to happen, because then, because I still feel like it's, you're consorting with the enemy and I need to go over here and be my pagan self and I can't talk to you anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and some of it comes down to theology. I mean, the reality is that my theology does not include a variety of things that make one have to say, and these people are going to hell. I mean, first of all, I don't believe in hell. I don't think that hell exists as, and I feel perfectly confident saying I am a Christian and I believe that.
Yeah, me too.
It isn't like I'm being a heretic, really. Joking at the top of your show aside, in many ways, I'm actually pretty solidly Orthodox. But my understanding of Orthodoxy is, is that it really is about the fact. I mean, I am a panentheist.
Yeah, me too.
And my short version of that is everything is one, and the divine is the consciousness of the whole, and so. That is very comfortable. That's a very comfortable place as both a witch and a Christian.
Right.
And I know that there are Christian panentheists and there are witch and pagan panentheists. And then there are, Christians who are much more hardline monotheists and pagans who are much more hardline polytheists. But I think being both being a mystic and an ecstatic and a panentheist makes it way easier to navigate the waters. I mean, for me, and it means that I don't have a lot of the paradoxes or the sort of roadblocks that other people on either side have.
Right.
Because I don't see, and what's the problem?
Yeah.
I don't need to choose. I'm not,
Yeah.
And I play around with language a lot. I will often talk about the Christian pantheon. And, but again, I'm a panentheist. And so ultimately everything is one.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess so maybe I am a monotheist.
Well, I think some people would consider panentheism a form of monotheism, I suppose, but I don't know. I've never really seen it that way because, I do believe like even the facets of the one that are the deities to me, they still have their unique properties,
Sure.
If I'm working with the dying, I want to call in Hecate because of her properties of working with the dying and manning the gates. So, I don't know. I think for some people, it's your mileage may vary. You have your set of what you see the world as, and for a lot of people, realizing that that's okay and that other people's visions of the world can be much different from yours and you can still work together, that just seems to blow people's minds. And for me, I'm just kind of like, well, duh.
Yeah. Deity to me is as different as you and I are, but ultimately we are one. It's as different as the table that your computer is on and the table that my computer is on, but it's all one.
Right. Yeah. And we can still communicate even though we're in different spaces, different times, on different computers or whatever, but we're still communicating. And I think that's kind of a very apt analogy for deity.
Yeah. Yeah. So I work with the Christian pantheon. What's really interesting is since I've come out way more in both communities, actually have been working with Jesus a whole lot more. One of the things I think that happened in progressive Christianity was that we, for a while there, we were trying so hard to prove that we weren't conservative Christianity.
Right.
And in many ways, I think a lot of clergy became agnostic and almost atheist, because we really sort of let go of the magic. Yeah. Progressive Christianity threw in completely with science at a time when science hadn't finished or hadn't gotten to the point where it understands the way energy works. Right. And Christianity, progressive Christianity, hasn't quite caught up with that yet. Mm-hmm. We are slowly starting to. But that is an interesting, and I'm not sure where I'm going with that. It's okay. Except that in terms of me and deity, I had actually gotten pretty, my working with deity had actually become pretty lukewarm, had become pretty generic. Right. Particularly on the Christian side. And so getting much more involved back in the reclaiming community. So I realized I was a reclaiming witch in the 80s, but then was very solitary, and I really wasn't hanging out with the community. I would go to things periodically. It's really been in the last 10 years that I've gotten way back involved with the community again, and so I actually have found myself working with very uniquely Jesus energy, way more than I did when I was actually a Christian minister, trying to be much more generic about the divine. Right.
That's interesting, because I find myself kind of doing similar at the moment, because it just seems like that. But Jesus to me is the healing teacher. And so it seems like there's a lot more healing energy needed lately. And also, in starting my own church, it's like people are trying to rediscover Jesus as a mystic, as a healer, as a teacher. And, they've not really been taught, like you were saying before, progressive Christianity seemed, I think in Protestantism in general, basically chucked out the mysticism with the bathwater, Right. And, but I also think, being witches coming back into the Christian element with the mysticism intact. We've been preserving that kind of mysticism because of the history of witchcraft, especially modern neo-pagan witchcraft, that stems from the Brit trad lines, because that really was historically stemming from the Christian grimoire traditions and the Western traditions and the Judaic traditions. So it's like, sometimes I think we've preserved the mysticism for when Protestantism was ready to come and pick it back up again.
Yeah. Have you read Thomas Cahill's book, How the Irish Saved Civilization?
No, I haven't read that one.
Yeah, well, it reminded me of what you were saying in that, and it's a similar thing. It's sort of because the Irish ended up being so isolated when everything broke down in Europe during the Middle Ages, that when that they preserved the texts and a variety of classical works that they were able to reintroduce into European culture when European culture was ready for it to come back. Oh wow! And so I think I think what you said is exactly that. I think that the witches were able to kind of hold on to, certainly from a sort of Western European and Northern European perspective and Celtic perspective, stuff that had been there for a long time but had gotten lost.
Yeah. Well, I think there's also some other people that are bringing a lot of Eastern tradition in too, because, I've been seeing a lot of people working with Hindu deities, with Buddhism, with Shinto and other aspects of Eastern work too. So I think I'm finding it a very interesting blend of mysticism that's coming in back into Christianity. Because I've seen more and more, especially progressive churches, trying to include more of this mystic element from different traditions.
Right. And then you get into the appreciation versus appropriation conversation and, what is appropriate. And, particularly when you're working with, is sort of like Hinduism that, has, it's a long standing, living tradition that, is it okay to just grab a deity, or is it okay to just, I do a lot of chakra work, and I find that really helpful. And, am I appropriating Eastern mysticism, or, am I just dealing with the reality of that there are actually 7 energy centers in my body? Mm-hmm. And what do they do?
Well, also, I think, you're an academic too, and you're able to learn the history and and find out how the practitioners have done it over the centuries and still do it. And I think that's the important part between appropriation and utilizing a technique is like, can you find the history? Can you see, can you give acknowledgement to those practitioners and maybe even learn from a practitioner instead of just trying to muck about on your own if you can.
Right. Which, having grown up I was born in 1959. Mm-hmm. So, I was a college student. I was a high school student and a college student in the 1970s and the early 1980s.
Right.
And it was just, the floodgate of information and wisdom flowing in from the sort of non-Christian European world was pretty amazing. At that point in time. Yeah.
Yeah. So I also think that it's kind of true now because with the internet, we're kind of at a similar point where Christianity had begun, where, with early Christianity, it was this influx of traditions and peoples and everything all in one space because, roads were happening and transportation technology had changed. And now we're at a similar crossroads with the internet because the internet technology just keeps getting faster and faster and the world keeps getting smaller and smaller. So it's like, I think we're having a similar kind of epiphany.
Yeah. I think that's true. And yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of my ministry actually is because, one of the things, I'm not serving a local church right now. I'm the, campus pastor, but I also, a lot of my work is writing. And, there's the print media, SageWoman Magazine. I've got a lovely article in the most recent issue of Crone, actually. But a lot of the writing that I'm doing is online, and it's it's so interactive, and I love that. I'm in several multi-faith Facebook groups where we really are sharing wisdom with each other and honestly asking questions of each other. And, my favorite conversation in one of those groups was when a number of Muslim women and a number of Hellenistic pagan women who cover their heads had this incredibly wonderful tip sharing on different ways to play with scarves.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
I think I've seen some of this. I did a thing at Pantheacon about head covering, and they'd point me to that group, and it was really fascinating.
Yeah. So it was really fun to hear them to sort of read the Muslim woman and the pagan woman talking about why and really getting into it. And yeah. So, those kinds of things are now possible on a much larger scale than they were 100 years ago or 50 years ago or 10 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just makes things really interesting because I think even with the pagan world, because the pagan community kind of grew up with the internet, because it was pretty dominant on the internet because that was the easiest way to connect with folks. Right. And I talked to Devin Hunter a while back about the same thing where it's like, at first it's like, you're pagan? Oh my God, I'm seeing another pagan in real life. And now it's just like, boom, we've exploded. Right. And, and we're now arguing theology.
Yeah.
Instead of civil rights, a lot of the civil rights stuff, we're also arguing the theology now.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, certainly in the pagan, witch, and heathen community, now that we're becoming more mainstream, it's not so much about circle the wagons against the Christians. It's about now people are having, I mean, as you know, we've had several fairly large and public pagan not fights, but debates around a variety of things in the last few years, around gender, around, I mean, certainly around, panentheism versus hard polytheism. And it's fascinating to watch all this.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's interesting, and I think I've told you about the work that we've done around gender, and a lot of people have heard about it already. But it's been interesting just to see how fast we utilize the technologies and we utilize our communities to really create change. I mean, and granted, we are witches, so, there you go. That explains a lot of it.
That's our charge, yeah.
But it's just amazing how fast it can go now. Just, within 2 years, the whole conversation of gender has really changed.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting. About 3 years ago, right after all that blew up at Pantheacon, Reclaiming began to have gender salons, which Reclaim. I love the organization. Is that an oxymoron? The organization Reclaiming, coming out of the anarchist tradition. But there were these gender salons that were happening, and I happened to go to one, and it was sort of interesting because the discussion. So in my Christian denomination, we'd already had that discussion, and so it truly was one of the only times when the Christians were actually, my version of the Christians were actually ahead of the pagans on something, because they had already dealt with that,
right.
In my denomination, the United Church of Christ. So it was really fun to go to the gender salon and say, well, in my other tradition.
Nice. Well, I was really excited for Reclaiming because I think it was about a year ago or so. Reclaiming changed its
the principles.
Because my friend, I think Claire Bonham.
Yes.
She came to me. She's like, Gina, guess what we did? This is so exciting. And I was like, yeah, this is big deal. This is really cool. Because, to be honest, Reclaiming does have a lot of influence in a lot of the neo-pagan groups in the rest of the country. And I think
mighty.
Yeah. But I think, Reclaiming, taking the lead on that, I think is really just amazing.
Yeah. Well, and just interesting. So in my Christian denomination, I had actually 10 years ago worked on a curriculum. We had a young minister who was born in a female body, but came to understand in college that he was male, and
right.
And while in seminary, went into transition. And this was a number of years ago. This wasn't recently.
Wow.
And out of that, the denomination actually created a documentary about his life, and it actually ends with his ordination as a United Church of Christ minister. He actually works for the national staff now. And they called me in because I'm a curriculum writer. They called me in to actually work on the curriculum to go with the documentary. And so like I said, I had already worked on some of the trans issues there. But it's fascinating to think. So in Christianity, of course, we had to reclaim feminine language for the divine. And of course, in paganism, much of paganism, reclaiming the divine was not the issue, but the duality of the divine and the binary nature of gender was equally as traumatic to have to move through.
Yeah. I mean, that's what set me off in the first place. That's how we started, our work, because I had gone to one of the workshops and it was about male deity. And I was like all excited because I was like, hey, I work with a male deity. This would be awesome. And basically I was told only men allowed. And hey, the Dianics are down the hall. And it's like, well, Dianics are all well and good, but that's not my cup of tea. And, I work with a male deity. So, what's the deal? And so that kind of like started me off, because I realized that there was still a lot of the notion of goddess and God, and like women worship goddess, men worship God. And that's just kind of how it is.
Right.
Although I will say the West Coast was kind of light years ahead of the East Coast in that regard.
Yeah. Well, and that really wasn't an issue, really. Because everybody was, but yeah, in the more traditional British Wicca, definitely.
Well, reclaiming always seemed to have more of a very open idea of what goddess and deity is.
Yeah. That certainly was my experience. And that was part of why it was so easy for me to slip in and not feel like I had to not be a Christian.
Right.
Even though, kind of early on, there was some conversations in reclaiming around that and what makes a reclaiming community and what makes a reclaiming witch. Mm-hmm. But certainly by the time I got involved again 10 years ago, really actively, that had pretty much all worked itself out. So
right,
in that sense that I had to choose.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I still get a lot of questions from people when they ask me, so how do you reconcile the two? And I know for me it was more of like, there's a lot of stuff that overlaps. A good percentage of stuff overlaps. But, there's some practices that I do as a witch that, I probably don't really talk about in my Christian community. And, and there's some aspects of Christianity where it's just like, it just doesn't fit in the conversation when I'm in pagan community sometimes. So, do you still get that as well? Like, when people ask you, like, how do you reconcile the two?
Yes and no. And I'm trying to think about, are there things in either, one of the things that I'm realizing is that there's an awful lot of witch tech and ritual tech that, boy, I wish that I had a group of ritualists in my Christian community working with me on. And in fact, I just, you'll laugh. So I just sent an email. I'm leading a worship service on Sunday at a Christian church that I actually served as their pastor a number of years ago. And they're doing a thing honoring their, it's part of their 125th anniversary thing. But so we're doing, we're actually doing this particular event is honoring, in that tradition, the kind of cerebral Congregationalists merged in the early 1930s with a small indigenous group of folks who just called themselves Christian, who were more frontier revivalists. And so we're doing a revival, which is very cool. Common in the UCC. But I just put a little call out to several witch friends and said, anybody want to come and do some stealth magic with me? I'm going to lightly aspect the Holy Spirit. And usually I do it without, anchors or tenders or anything, but it would be really interesting to actually have some witches in the crowd to help me, do that energy. Because that's not ceremonial tech that most Christians think about, even though I begin to introduce some of that to my Christian clergy colleagues, and they're like, a tender? How wonderful that would be on Sunday morning.
Right? Oh, absolutely.
Because in theory, as a Christian minister, I should be aspecting Jesus most of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And certainly the Holy Spirit. Yeah. So,
well, there's sometimes where I get through church and Like, especially the last service we did, for my church, we did a Samhain service, and, it was through the grace of the Holy Spirit and Jesus that I actually got through it. Cause like, I don't remember anything of that service right now.
Yeah.
And, I remember being there, I remember setting up, and I remember closing and taking down. And, Spirit got me through that service because, we were in the middle of moving and everything. So it's just, I find it very useful, actually, and it surprises some people sometimes when it happens, and that, they come and look at me in the face and they kind of realize there's something not quite the same about Gina right now.
Yeah. No. Well, it's always amazing. Again, Protestants, kind of lost the magic, lost there have always been the mystics, but sort of the run of the mill, certainly UCC churches are pretty come in, sit down, be cerebral. But every once in a while the Holy Spirit would show up in such a powerful way, and and I knew what was going on because I was a witch.
Right.
I mean, I have another set of language for what's happening right now because I'm a witch. And yeah.
I find I translate a lot for people, when, especially at Refuge, City of Refuge being very Pentecostal in its praxis. Right. I find like I'm sitting there, I'm trying to talk and I'm using my witch vocabulary and people are like, what? And so I find myself translating a lot, and then they're like, oh, you're with the Spirit. I get it.
Yeah.
And it seems to really foster a lot of interfaith communication when I can say, being somebody in between, I can be like, oh, it's like X when you do this,
Right. Yeah. I end up doing that a lot, which is lovely.
Mm-hmm. Do you do a lot of interfaith work just in your own regular ministry?
At this right now, I'm also a trainer for the FaithTrust Institute, which is a multi-faith organization that grew out of it grew up in the 1980s, particularly in response to clergy sexual abuse in the Christian church.
Right.
And that's abuse by clergy, not necessarily of clergy. And a woman named Marie Fortune created this group that, so they do trainings around actually domestic violence prevention and response, child abuse prevention and response, clergy boundaries.
Right.
And they work with a Christian denomination. They work with Jewish congregations. They work with Muslim congregations. They work with Buddhist groups. And I'm one of their trainers. And so I have ended up doing a lot of multi-faith work and training in that context that has that sort of focus and purpose. In terms of multi-faith or interfaith worship, I've gone in and out of doing things. Certainly when the Occupy movement was sort of on the sidewalk, right. Before it wonderfully morphed into this incredible organizational practice that is everywhere now.
Right.
And it was still tense and so occupying the physical concrete of cities. I did work there. I did work at that point, an activist work. So
cool.
Yeah.
What do you think is the future of multi-faith? Because it seems like we were talking about, with the advent of the internet, with people being more interested in learning about different traditions, and a lot of people seem to be coming up into being multi-faith people, whether it's, something and Christianity or two other or more traditions. Yeah. Do you think that's kind of where the future is going, or is it kind of just what's happening now, Yeah,
I'm not sure. I was very excited the PSR has a new president who I just finally got a chance to meet, who is Jewish and Christian.
Oh, excellent.
from birth lineage, and never felt like he had to choose. Mm-hmm. So, when I first saw his name, I think it's Vasquez Levy. I was thinking that was a hyphenated name with a spouse.
Yeah.
But no, that's actually, sort of, I think mother Jewish, father Catholic.
Oh,
or
wow.
Lutheran.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it was interesting hearing him say he never felt, he didn't feel like he had to choose. Mm-hmm. So I think more and more people are doing the and. Mm-hmm. I really believe there's a wonderful religious sociologist named Phyllis Tickle who comes out of, Phyllis's work comes out of the sort of Protestant emerging church stuff. But, she talks about this 500-year cycle. And that we are in one of the, and that, sort of every 500 years, things change.
Right.
And what happens is whatever the norm has been for a few hundred years begins to breaks down completely. Mm-hmm. And then out of the rubble, there is out of the deconstruction is reconstructed, sort of whatever the new normal is going to be for the next few hundred years. And, I definitely think we're right in the midst of that. And so I think whatever the new normal is going to be will definitely be sort of set in place within the next 50 years. Mm-hmm. And I think it'll be a lot of and. Yeah. I think there will always be people who, it's a sort of roots down into whatever your tradition has been, but kind of branches up into all of the possibilities and connections of whatever there is. So, I
agree. I mean, it seems though what we're coming into is also a more acceptance of the and, an acceptance of, different aspects of difference instead of going, oh my God, you're different.
Yeah. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see. And of course we live here. We live in the Bay Area. So those kinds of things are pretty easy.
Right.
And yet all over the world, there is more acceptance of and, which means that the people who are more comfortable with exclusiveness are going to become more frightened. And so it's going to get, it's just scary for them. And so there will be places in the world where it's going to look like it's actually getting worse. And it is, because people are frightened. And until the next waves of generations come along who are more comfortable.
Yeah. Well, I think we're seeing that a lot now, especially with youth, where with youth, like things like being gay or any of that kind of difference, or being transgendered is kind of like, yeah, okay. And whatever, where with a lot of the older adults, there's still the kind of like,
Yeah. Well, the song that just won the Country Music Awards Song of the Year, and I can't remember the young woman's name, but it definitely has. It's kind of a whatever you are, it's fine. Mm-hmm. Including if you want to kiss a lot of boys, that's fine, or if you want to kiss a lot of girls, that's fine too.
Awesome. I think I know what the song you're talking about is.
One Song of the Year. Yes, something about arrows. Follow your arrow. Or
right.
Yeah.
I've listened to it. I don't remember who it is either, but yeah, it was a good song.
Yeah.
Wow, Song of the Year, huh?
Song of the Year.
Wow. So, that's excellent. Well, we are running out of time, and I think my voice is just holding out after being sick last week. So, where can people find you online?
There are a couple of places. I literally, of the 1 billion or however many billion people there are on Facebook, I actually am the only Lizann Bassham on Facebook.
Really?
And a lot of my posts on my Facebook work is really sort of thinking about things I don't post daily, but pretty regularly. And so that's a place to find me. The other place to find me is at Pagan Square. My blog is called Sacred Cells, CELLS, Sacred Cells, at the Pagan Square blog. It's part of the SageWoman channel.
Right.
You can read my column in SageWoman Magazine. Yeah, and that's probably those are the places you can find me online and in print. You can find my novels and my CDs, at either Host Baby or CD Baby, or of course Amazon and iTunes. I'm there as well.
And if people wanted to ask you questions.
Absolutely. I'm always open to that. So best way to get a hold of me is through Facebook. And come up to the North Bay. We do 8 public, wonderful rituals on the Wheel of the Year every year. We just did our Samhain. Yule is coming up on Friday the 19th of December at the Sebastopol Grange Hall, which is just lovely and delightful.
Excellent.
And I'm also at Pacific School of Religion every week. So,
and you also have a website, Frontport Spirit, right?
Thank you very much. Completely forgot about that. That'll give you all the information. My website is the words frontporchspirit.com.
And we'll have all of that in the show notes, and I'll have links to everything in the show notes as well. So, we'll do that. And thank you so much for coming to talk with me.
Oh, Gina, thank you so much for doing what you do. I just really appreciate your ministry, and I appreciate the way you bridge worlds, and your sense of humor, and your compassionate and loving presence.
Oh, thank you very much.
I'd like to thank Lizann for joining us this week. As always, if you have comments, questions, or would like to read the show notes, you can go to thisweekinheresy.com. There, you can also subscribe to the show via iTunes or the Stitcher app, join our forums, or follow us on Twitter at TWIH Podcast. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.